Hey everybody, this is Jim Grazanzio from the Oracle Groundbreakers team. We're back in Honolulu, Hawaii for UnVoxxed Hawaii 2020. And I'm here with John Spurling from Twitter. John, welcome.
Thanks very much.
John, I actually met you a little bit earlier in one of the sessions here on debugging, and you said a couple of things that really interested me, so I wanted to have a conversation with you here. Actually, let's start there with the session. It was a very active session, and it wasn't the session that you suggested. It was somebody else, I believe, right?
That's right.
But you were really active in the session, and there was a lot of people in there. It was on debugging. Give me a summary of what that was all about.
Sure. So the original idea for the session was debugging, but also debugging up and down the stack, particularly when you have complicated software systems involving lots of different components and layers. I actually do Java virtual machine development at Twitter, and the session was proposed by somebody else who also works in system software. So the idea was debugging these complicated systems, and I've been working in this space for over 20 years, both on lower level hardware, lower level software, sometimes involving custom hardware, as well as higher level software systems. And sometimes when there's a bug in anywhere within the stack, it can be very difficult to see where the bug is, to kind of get insight as to where the problems might be. So during the session, there was a lot of conversation about what are some of the different debugging techniques you can use, in terms of actual features of software debuggers, as well as kind of higher level, as a human, how do you approach those problems?
Yeah, this is actually, I sat in on the session and I was very interested because a personal interest of mine is how you engineers solve really, really hard problems. And debugging, obviously, you have a situation where you got a system that's not working, for whatever reason. You got lots of tools that you use, but there's also a lot of human element as well. And you brought up some issues about, working really hard on something, then taking a break. And I was wondering if you can summarize some of that here for us.
Sure. So many years ago, I read the biography of Seymour Cray, who was an early pioneer in supercomputers. And so one thing that really struck me was that Seymour Cray would apparently, when he was working on very difficult problems involving these supercomputers and parallelism, he would work for several hours, and if he got stuck, he would stop and go to his house, which was located very close to the office of Cray supercomputers. And he would dig these tunnels underneath his house.
Actual tunnels.
Physical tunnels. This was
something that you can actually walk in?
That's right. Physical tunnels he could walk in. And he was actually building these tunnels because it was during the kind of Cold War period. And he was worried about some sort of nuclear blast. But digging the tunnel actually served a very interesting purpose, which was he'd be working on a difficult problem and thinking very actively, well, how do I solve this? Do I do this? Do I do that? Using his kind of active brain. But at a certain point,
that'll take a good outtake there. So it's very, very windy out here, and just concerned about the camera flopping over. Okay, we're digging tunnels now here.
Yeah. So after he'd work on a problem very actively and be thinking about this problem, he would take a break by going and digging physical tunnels underneath his house. And there was something about moving from kind of active problem solving, where he was deliberately thinking about a problem, to passive problem solving. Well, not even really passive problem solving, but just doing something else. Going and physically using a pickaxe or whatever he used, or shovels to dig these tunnels, he was not actively thinking about the problem, but he was just kind of letting his subconscious deal with the problem. And reading about this many years ago really kind of stuck with me. And I noticed that often if I was trying to debug something complicated, I would try and fail to figure out what the problem was. And then maybe I would go home, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and I would just know. I'd just wake up and say, huh, yeah, that's actually what it is. And I was really astounded by this, because we think of programming, software engineering as work, as a thing you explicitly do, with intention. Right. But then somehow your brain just takes all of the pieces it's been poring over and somehow sees connections in the back of your mind that it just kind of puts together, and you get this almost sort of asynchronous callback in your mind. Oh, try this.
But what's interesting to me is that you can be working on a problem for weeks, or at least hours and hours and hours, or weeks and weeks and weeks, and all of a sudden, you're struggling with it. And all of a sudden, the answer is immediate. So what happens in the interim?
Right? Yeah, that's the really fascinating part that I'm also very curious about, because it's almost like when you're working on the problem actively, you're gathering data, looking at information, trying to see what the puzzle pieces are metaphorically and how they fit together. And later in the back of your mind, it's almost like your unconscious mind, when you're sleeping, when you're taking a shower, when you're digging a tunnel under your house, whatever it is, the activity you do is that lets your brain stop thinking consciously about a problem and working unconsciously. It's almost like it just starts looking at all of the pieces of the puzzle and just starts figuring out, okay, well, this could fit together this way, or that could fit together that way.
Do you think this observation is something that comes naturally to engineers because they're always solving puzzles? Or is it something they have to learn?
For me, at least, it was absolutely something I had to learn. I had to learn about myself, partially through things like when I read the biography of Seymour Cray, also just reading about other engineers' experiences about this sort of thing. And that's why I brought it up during the session on debugging today, because it really was a non-intuitive thing when I started my career. I didn't realize. I thought you just kind of worked on things. And I'd certainly had that experience of, realizing later that, okay, here's a potential solution to a problem or a thing to try that I hadn't tried before. But I honestly feel like when I was younger, I didn't really understand. I just thought, well, if I had just thought harder in the first place, I would have figured it out. And next time I just need to think even harder. But no, it seems to be a function of how people's brains work. But that was just completely non-intuitive to me at the time.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it's a personal interest of mine, and one of the books that I was talking to you a little bit earlier about is called Make It Stick, and it's all about learning. It's all about interleaving and doing spaced repetition and things like that. And there's a lot of neuroscience behind this. So I'm really interested in this concept, and I find that engineers do these things all the time, either through practice or just naturally. So let's switch gears a little bit here before the camera goes over in the wind here, and just wrap up by talking about the conference. What do you think of the event so far?
Oh, the event is really great. This is actually my second year attending, and for me, one of the great things about it is you really get an interesting cross section of people, anything from students or maybe scientists who want to break more into the field of software engineering, or people who are working in different problem domains, healthcare, things like that, to people who are, sometimes the key innovators or implementers of technologies that people use every day. And so really it's getting that cross section of people, as opposed to, just people who are from one particular background. I think that cross section of interesting people really makes for an interesting conference, and you get a different sense of what people are trying to do and what their experiences are. Plus, of course, the location in Hawaii doesn't hurt either.
You gonna hang out for a few days here?
Yeah, I've been here on Oahu for a few days, and then after this, I'll be going to Kauai for a few days.
I fly out tomorrow morning. Got to go back to work. But anyway, John, thank you very much for actually being here. It's a really interesting conversation, and we'll talk to you guys soon again for more interviews here from Hawaii, from UnVoxxed Hawaii. See you guys later. Bye bye.